Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's a pleasure to warmly welcome you to this webinar organized by the Ministry of Public Education as part of the Continuing Education Program for Primary and Secondary Educational Staff, taking place at the beginning of this academic year in 2026. We truly appreciate your participation today. This professional development space has been designed to strengthen educational practice, address needs identified in everyday teaching context, and support a solid start to the school year, both in terms of educational management and student learning. We hope you find this session useful, relevant, and enriching for your professional work. The title of today's webinar is Assessment for Learning and Inclusion in Secondary Education, Practical Strategies for English Classroom. This session is aimed at primary and secondary English teachers from the Ministry of Public Education. Before we begin, allow me to briefly share the purpose of the session. This webinar aims to strengthen pedagogical mediation and curricular implementation in the English subject area at the primary and secondary levels through professional development activities articulated around strategic thematic access. These activities are oriented toward the development of students' oral communicative competence, meaningful interaction, and the design of authentic communicative tasks, all supported by the pedagogical use of emerging technologies and assessment for learning in order to contribute to the development of the English language competencies within the Costa Rican education system. This is Melissa Gonzalez Castro, Regional English Advisor from San Jose Norte, who will be serving as the moderator for today's webinar. At this moment, we kindly ask all participants to please complete the attendance register, which is already available in the chat. Let me briefly outline how today's session will unfold. We will begin with the main presentation entitled Assessment for Learning and Inclusion in Secondary Education, Practical Strategies for the English Classroom, and we will conclude with a question and answer session. To continue with today's webinar, we will introduce our specialist, Andrea Lazo de la Vega Moreno. Andrea Lazo de la Vega Moreno holds a BA in English and a master's degree in teaching English as a foreign language from the University of Costa Rica. She is a certified oral proficiency evaluator from the American Council of Teaching of Foreign Languages, ACTFL, and is an international academic consultant for Oxford University Press. She works as a professor in the English for Specific Purposes ESP program at the School of Modern Languages from the University of Costa Rica. Andrea has taught in different universities and programs to develop teaching products that incorporate gamification and technology in the learning process and has experience analyzing methodologies and outcomes. Her background includes teaching at both primary and secondary levels, as well as serving as administrative roles. Andrea has published articles in different magazines and has participated in national and international conferences. Her interests revolve around mystery and suspense literature, acquisition of second language, self and peer assessment, and the use of tools and technology to enhance the learning process. Andrea, thank you very much for being with us. You may begin.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. As you saw, my name is Andrea Lazo de la Vega Moreno, and I work as an academic consultant for Oxford University Press. It's a real pleasure and also honor to be here with all of you today in this session that is called Assessment for Learning and Inclusion. I'm sure that you have seen these words before, assessment, learning, inclusion, but what happens when we put them together? That's precisely the topic that we have for today. And as with any other academic activity, it's important to have a clear objective. And for today, we have that we're going to explore how assessment for learning can be used as a formative and inclusive approach in primary and secondary English classrooms, supporting learner participation, progress, and autonomy through practical and classroom-friendly strategies. Okay, so here we have very important words. First, that this will be formative and also inclusive. We know that most of the times, and that's the reality of our teaching practices, we use evaluation to get a grade and to determine if our students pass or if they don't pass the course, right? Um, and in this case, we're going to analyze it from a different perspective, not as a final grade, but as a formative process itself. And also inclusive because in our classes, we have mixed ability groups, which basically means that we have the students who are below the level, at the level, and above the level, which is our reality, which is also great because each student will go at his or her own rhythm. But that can also be challenging when we have to teach, right? And also design materials and so on and so forth. So, with assessment for learning is a way in which we can continue what we're already doing with these students and personalize as much as possible the process for them. Also, with this, we focus on participation, on improvement to progress, and also on their autonomy. This will change, right, depending on the level that I'm teaching. But there are some common principles that we can use for both primary and secondary classrooms. And the idea is that you can have classroom friendly strategies for your students and also for yourself. With this, I want us to keep some aspects in mind. First, sharing is caring. Okay. I'm also a teacher, so I know what it means to be inside the classroom. I also know the beauties of this profession, but also the challenges of it. And even though we are surrounded by people most of our time, I consider that teaching is a very lonely profession because we plan alone, we prepare materials alone, we think about our evaluations alone, we design instructions alone, and so on. So when we have the opportunities to share what we do, to share what we have learned, to share what has worked for us, and also what was a complete disaster, because that's reality, I think that at those moments is when we really can build a sense of community. And beyond sharing experiences, knowing that we are not alone in this. Okay? So, whenever you have the chance, and this will be an invitation for all of us, whenever you have the chance, share what you are doing in your classes. Give suggestions and recommendations when asked. And if you have materials that you have prepared and have worked beautifully, feel free to share them too, right? This is how we improve our own professional development. And at the end of the day, our students will also benefit from our own community as teachers. So, this is precisely what I want to do today share with you information that I think might be useful for your everyday activities. Then explore options that can improve your practices. When I use the word improve, I'm not thinking about adding more to what you already do because I know that time is one of our biggest challenges. We have to cover lots of topics, lots of content, and lots of evaluations and prepare things, and you know how it goes. So the idea is not to give you something else to do, but take some time to analyze what you are already doing and use that. In other words, invest our time and our energy wisely. As teachers, we also have to learn how to simplify what we do. I think it's part of our survival skills. And when I talk about simplifying is completely the opposite of doing the bare minimum. Is basically designing activities, analyzing our teaching practices in a way that can give me time to really be there inside the classroom with my students. That is the place where they really need me the most. And if I have used an activity that was great, I can adapt it to the particular group that I have in a school year. I can recycle some parts of that activity. I can also modify it when it didn't work, right? Or completely eliminate it because it was a disaster. And that's kind of our kind of duty, right? As teachers, like reflecting and analyzing, okay, this worked, this was a disaster, what can I do, right? So simplifying in terms of where do I invest my time and my energy so my students can have the best experience that I can give them. Okay. And finally, taking what works for your own teaching in your own context is not the same to teach first graders than to teach fifth graders. And if we go to high school, a completely different story. It's not the same if you have 20 students. It's not the same if you have 30. It's not the same if you have a small classroom or if you have a big classroom. It depends also on the materials that you have, the time that you have available to teach your content, the type of evaluations that you have to do, the syllabus that you have to follow, the energy that you have. So many, many things. So every single teacher is different, every single student is different, and every single group is different. So how can we learn from this? You personalize the information for you. Okay? So you take this info and you think about your own context and you would say, yes, I can definitely incorporate this. Or maybe I can do this, but I will need to give it a try to see if it works. Or maybe I cannot include the whole process, but I will use A and C. Or I will modify this slightly so I come a little bit closer to this idea. We don't need to change everything. Okay? Improvement doesn't come from big changes. It comes from small changes that you can keep over time. Okay? So I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. The idea of this space is completely the opposite. Okay? For you to feel comfortable to explore, to give it a try. Okay? Not everything that you will read, not everything that you will listen to will work for you and for your own context. But always, always give it a try, at least to learn a little bit from it. Maybe it will not work right now, but maybe in the future it will be of great help. Okay. Um, and I know also that the theory is great. It helps us a lot, but sometimes when we get into the classroom, oops, surprise, surprise, the reality doesn't match what we have in the books. And I think that happens to every single teacher, right? Regardless of the level. So you personalize it, and in that way, the theory can become a tool and an ally into your own teaching practices. And beyond that, it can be meaningful to you. I know that the focus of teaching is on the students, which is great, but what about teachers too? Okay, I mean, we're going to be there teaching the content, kind of tracking down how our students are doing. So we also have to think about approaches that are friendly for us too, and also meaningful and memorable for us. So in this teaching exercise, all of us, we are part of this. I have divided this session in different parts so I can organize the content better. And I also included some reflection questions because as teachers, and as I mentioned before, I know that time can be really limited, uh, but there has to be some way in which I can take even a couple of minutes to think about what I'm doing, right? It doesn't have to be something very philosophical or invest 2 hours of my week on this. even sometimes just 5, 10 minutes to analyze maybe my day or my week and say, okay, this was great. I can have a follow-up activity of this. I can recycle this other activity. I will definitely eliminate this. Um, why? Because in that way, what you are doing and your energy also becomes meaningful. Your students will benefit from it and you will benefit from it. Even at the end of the week, you can say, oh my goodness, this week was really difficult. And you start analyzing and say, well, I had to prepare a lot of materials. Maybe instead of preparing, I don't know, 10 different materials, I can prepare six and maybe have some follow-up activities of those six. Okay, simplifying, but for the benefit of all of us, right? Um, or in terms of assessment for learning and inclusion, I know that my students have a quiz, they have an oral presentation, they have an exam. So I already have to prepare them for that. So I will prepare them for that evaluation, yes, but the purpose will be learning at the end of the day. Okay, so basically that's the idea that I have for you today. Okay, so when we talk about assessment for learning, we are not talking about adding more tests or more work to our lessons. Okay, that will not be fair to us, right? Especially because I just mentioned that we need to simplify what we do, invest our energy for us to really be there where our students need us. So adding more tests and more things to do, I think is not the solution. So basically, the invitation is for us to use the assessment moments that we already have in our classrooms to support learning. So it's not adding anything else, it's using what I already have. I'm really, really using it. Okay. So we're going to be talking about different principles, and I know that I have teachers from primary school, also from high school, and there are differences, right, between these two populations. Even in primary, it's not the same if I teach second graders that if I teach sixth graders, right? But we're going to have principles that will be the same for all of us, okay? What changes is how you approach your students, the level of complexity, the way in which you give instructions, right? And also sometimes the materials that you use, but not the purpose of the assessment, okay? You will always expect something from your students, right? And in that way, we need to have very clear objectives. Also, we're talking about formative and not summative practices. Okay. I know that we need evaluations. I know that we need to have a grade to know if our students pass, for example, the school year or not. Um, and it's not that numbers are good or bad, but the most important question is, what do I do with those numbers? Do I use them to make decisions maybe after 1 month, after 2 months, after some particular evaluations, or is just a grade? Okay, so basically is what is the meaning of that number for me as the person in charge of the group and in charge of the learning process. So by a formative perspective, it will focus more on helping students learn rather than just measure the outcome of the learning. So basically, the evaluation will be the last part of this. Okay, the most relevant aspect of the evaluation is not the evaluation itself, but the process that you went through to get to that evaluation. So the idea is to use assessment to facilitate, okay, the learning and also to improve teaching rather than just providing evidence of how my students are doing at a particular time, right? Because I know that if I have quiz one, it will evaluate how my students are doing, I don't know, in week 3, 4, and 5. But then what happens in week 10, 11, and 12, right? Those evaluations will give me how they are doing at particular times of the school year, right? But what do I do with that? So this is basically, and I like to call it like a mindset, because it's not a handout that you develop. It's not like a checklist that you give your students or that you have for you. It's not adding an extra exam. It's not like that. It's a mindset in terms of how you use tests, right, as opportunities for you and for your learners to recognize progress and identify areas of improvement and the next steps to follow. And I know that this can be a real challenge because learning can be very abstract sometimes. Um, like regularly, how do you know that you are learning? You will get a grade, but that grade really reflects if I'm learning or not. So it could be a little bit philosophical too, right? And many experts on the topic are still debating on some aspects of evaluation, right? Um, but is this idea of helping our students recognize their own progress. And this is something that we can do even with first graders. You just adapt the expectations, adapt um, your materials and your practices to the content that will be appropriate for a first grader. And they can also learn and have like this sense of progress. Maybe you could identify 3 colors this week, but maybe in 2 more weeks you will be able to identify 5. Okay, so that sense of progress. And it can be applied to any of the skills. It could be reading, to writing, listening, to speaking, you name it. If you want to focus more, not so much on the macro skills, but the micro skills, even progress in terms of soft skills and interaction, like especially with the little ones. So when I say that it works on the formative part, definitely it will require time to sit down and plan how I'm going to do this, okay? But the beauty of this is that once you get a sense of it, you just replicate the strategy, okay? And you don't have to think about developing extra handouts or anything like that. It's with what you already have inside the classroom. Because through this process, you can help yourself define what you're expecting from your students, the objectives that you have for them, what are the learning intentions, going beyond the content itself. For example, if I have to teach my students the present simple, it's not just learning the grammar part, but the function. Why? Like, why am I teaching my students a simple present? What do I want them to do with that? I want them to be able to talk about their routines. Okay. That will be my focus in terms of my teaching process and also in terms of my evaluation. Okay. So, what are my intentions? Kind of diagnosing what goes well, right? And what can be improved or the problems that I faced. Maybe I'm evaluating my students on a particular topic, and then when going through the evaluation, I realize that maybe I didn't give them enough practice and they're really kind of facing lots of challenges with that topic. So, okay, for the next time, I need to give them more practice for this. Okay, so is like analyzing what we do has nothing wrong with it. It's like the way in which you can really make sure that we are also, as teacher, focusing on this formative part. How do we give students feedback? Okay, because it's a reality, and I know that sometimes we just focus on the grade, but the mistakes that our students had in a particular evaluation, if they don't know how to identify first that it is a mistake and then how to correct it, it's very likely that this student will continue making the same mistake over and over and over again for eternity, right? So evaluations are important, but also what about the feedback that I give them? Okay. So when we talk about assessment for learning, we can be talking about getting ready for a particular test, having some handouts to practice, some interactions, so role plays if you have a student A, student B, if you want your students to identify specific vocabulary and you have some flashcards. Um, so basically, every activity that you already use in your classes before you evaluate your students, okay? And the idea is that the exam will be like the external um, kind of tool that you will use to see, okay, how the process went and also to analyze future decisions, okay? As I mentioned, reflection is part of our learning process also as professionals. So I have these three questions that I would like you to kind of analyze or a little bit like think about them. The first one, in your own teaching context, how do you usually use assessment information? Like your students had a presentation. What do you do with the results? Mainly to assign a grade, to support students in understanding their learning and next steps? Like, what do you do with those results? And going back to the first idea of being realistic, maybe this is something that you want to give it a try, um, but you don't want to incorporate this in every single evaluation. Well, incorporate it in one that you will really like to explore with it. Okay, so you go little by little, you see how you feel, and we also need time to learn how to use some practices, right? It doesn't come from one day to the next. So we also have to be patient, right, and resilient when we want to try something maybe new or adapt a little bit what we are doing. Okay, so am I using the grades that I get just for my students to pass, or am I doing something else with that? Do I analyze and do I say, okay, I can see that from this evaluation, like most of the group had problems with A, B, or C. What do I do with that? Mhm. What opportunities for assessment for learning already exist in your classroom, even if you don't label them as such? Because sometimes we do many of these things, but we don't give them a name, right? Or we just need to modify them a little bit. So think about the process. Like you teach the content, then you practice, and then you have the evaluation. Regularly, that will be like the step to follow, right? So when you practice, do you just practice for the evaluation itself, or do you guide your students to see which topics do they feel more comfortable with, to have activities in which they can help each other and interact to review the topics? What do you do with that? Okay, because I know that, for example, let's continue with the one that I used before, the simple present. I teach the topic. Then I might have a handout, or I could have my students have a little role play, and then I will have the exam with other topics that I have covered before. So the idea with assessment of learning is that you take that part of when your students are completing a handout, for example, and it's not just completing the handout, like what else can they do with that? Okay. So guiding your students into, for example, it could be like third graders and above could work this approach in which, okay, from your practice, from these exercises, let's check this together. Okay, now after we check, I want you to highlight or to mark something in terms of the topic that you think you're struggling the most, and maybe the topic that you feel more comfortable with. You can even use happy faces and sad faces, like, okay, draw a happy face next to the topics that you like, that you feel comfortable with, and then draw a sad face next to the topics that you really don't understand. These might look as something very simple, but it's not simple at all because what you're doing is giving your students the chance to reflect and to see their own progress. Because normally is the teacher telling the student, you can do this, but you can't do this yet. No, this is the other way around. The student analyzing what they have right there and kind of also generating conclusions out of it. Okay, so it's not somebody else's responsibility to tell me things, but it's my responsibility. And this is something that we can do even with the little ones, as I was mentioning, drawing or just a check or an X, or the big ones, for example, highlight something or organize like these practice and divide this into the ones that you feel comfortable with, the ones that you are struggling. Okay. And also, what are we going to do if we're struggling with these topics? Okay, maybe we can have different arrangements, and students who mentioned that they feel really comfortable with this topic and they got the answers and they got good answers, those will be the students in charge of reviewing that topic with the other ones that are kind of struggling the most. Okay, so collaboration is part of this. So don't think about this as an extra activity that you have to do, like I have to plan something else. No, it's just basically after the practice that you already designed for them, what else would you do with that? And also, you would see that each student will have kind of his or her own strengths and weaknesses in terms of the topics. So, in a way, and at some point, all of them will have the chance to help others, and they will also have the chance to be helped. So, that's the idea. It also helps students work with frustration, like, okay, this topic, I don't get it, but I can understand these other three topics. Okay, so it's also this kind of self-discovery, and not just, okay, I'm having difficulties with this, but what are you going to do about it? Okay, so even in this way, you're giving your students the chance to get ready and to prepare themselves for the coming exams, right? So maybe you design a practice that will take them, I don't know, 1 hour to complete. So maybe design a practice that will take them just 30 minutes to complete, and the other 30 minutes you apply one of these strategies. So you don't have to invest more time, you just adapt a little bit what you have, right? And after an assessment activity, what do you usually do with the information you collect, right? How does it influence what you teach next? Do you go back to a particular topic with the results? Do you have a group session where you give general feedback? I don't know, for example, your students had an oral presentation and you see that your first graders are really struggling with vocabulary related to animals. So you say, okay, before I move to the next topic, let's review together this vocabulary. And you have, I don't know, some pictures, some flashcards, and a little activity to review that before you move on. Okay. Or for example, if you're working with, I don't know, sixth graders or high school students and they had an oral presentation, you collect kind of the most important mistakes or common mistakes in the group, and you have a general feedback session without adding any names, just okay, feedback in terms of the structure, vocabulary, or pronunciation, or whatever the focus was for that evaluation, right? So everybody can learn from each other. So what do we do? Or it's just here you have your grade and that's it. Because if the group didn't learn the topic, for example, of animals or what you were expecting from them, that lack will be there until they have another chance, okay, to face and to encounter that content. The same thing will happen with your students. If one of your students constantly says she are instead of she is, if your student doesn't know that she are is a mistake, that will be embedded in his or her production, and there is no way he or she can fix that. So we need to address that directly. And I know that it's not realistic to go sometimes student by student. So that's why we can have like a group session with those mistakes that you say at this level, we really need to kind of fix this. Okay. We cannot fix everything at the same time. That's impossible, right? So we have to choose our battles and really prioritize those mistakes that we say, okay, these I need to fix them at this level, right? Because what happens is that we keep building gaps, right? And mistakes start to fossilize, which is then when it's very difficult for them to correct the mistakes that they already have. So in this way, we go step by step. And also these sessions, for example, these group sessions are part of the evaluation too. And these sessions are a great example of assessment for learning and inclusion. Because if your student did a great job at this evaluation, perfect. This will be just a very easy review, and that's it. But if you also had students that really struggle with a topic, you're giving them another chance for them to learn. Okay. So with this, we move to the second part, which is, so why use it for learning, right? What is the reason for this? And I have a list. We could name more, but I try to choose the most relevant ones for your own context. So I will be describing them a little bit and giving also some examples. So the first one will be informed decisions. Okay. So the idea is that when you have these processes of assessment for learning, like, okay, what do I do after they complete the handout? Just check and see which is right and which is wrong. Yeah, it works, but what else? Is just having a mark right there in red really helping my students learn? Or is then when I ask them, let's analyze this, and how do you think we can fix this, and how can we fix this? And can you explain this to another classmate that is struggling with this? There is where learning happens because you turn just a handout in something meaningful and something memorable for them. Okay. I know that the part is important, but if we don't have an emotional connection, learning becomes very superficial. Okay. So when we are right there and we see how our students interact, for example, for the little ones, if they're working with some sort of flashcards, I can give them like another chance to practice, to help each other. And why do you think this one goes here? And why do you think this one goes in this different category, right? Like asking these questions. And when I see them, because I become an observer in some way, I can really identify where they are struggling. Is it in terms of the instructions? Because maybe I'm not clear enough in terms of the instructions. Maybe I'm giving them like a lot of steps to follow and they get lost. So in the evaluation, the problem is not that they don't know the content, but they don't understand the instructions. The instruction itself becomes an exercise. That shouldn't be. Okay. So when you are working on this assessment for learning before the exam, you say, okay, I see that my students are really struggling with the instructions. I should like double check that in the evaluation. Okay. Or I see that my students really don't understand this topic, so I'm going to take a couple of minutes to review it. Or I see that my students know the content, but if I change the context a little bit, they get lost. So I need to give them different opportunities of context. So I can make informed decisions. It's not just in the air just because I want to and because it's what works in my mind, right? But I have right there the evidence of what could help my students and also what could help me. Okay. Um, so in this way, I can make decisions about what to focus on, the evaluations, how much time also. Maybe I know with this particular group, they need a little bit more time. They can thrive and they can do an excellent job, but they need a little bit more of time, right? This can also be used to provide information to other teachers, to parents, right? And also to schools, right? So at the end is this idea of building community and using this information for something. Then we have learner needs. So um, it goes beyond just having the exam, but for our students to get a little bit more familiarized with how evaluation might look like. If, for example, my students don't know how to work with a particular exercise, it's not fair to include that in the evaluation because what I'm going to be evaluating is their ability to understand what they have to do, but not really the content that they practice with me. Okay, so this also gives us the chance, if we want to give it a try to a particular type of exercise in the exam, to practice that with them before. So when they get to the test, they are more familiarized and we can really evaluate them on what we are supposed to evaluate them, right? So this also gives the test more reliability and validity. It also helps us to provide feedback. We can provide feedback after the evaluation. We can also provide feedback before the evaluation. With assessment for learning, it works in both ways, right? Because maybe I can have this activity with the flashcards or a handout or a listening exercise or a role play that they had to prepare, for example. I can give them feedback there. Okay, it will be like a mock evaluation. So at the end of the day, I know that they will feel more comfortable when they have to get to the evaluation. And is not presenting everything beforehand because sure, I'm gonna change a little bit the focus on some things, or I'm gonna give them a different type of exercise that they already know how to use, but not precisely the one that we use for practice. Um, I can switch some things around. Um, but if one student cannot handle the content, I will definitely see that during the assessment of learning and also during the evaluation. Hopefully, the assessment for learning can help my student so he or she can do a little bit better on the exam. But sometimes that will not be the case because they need more time, right, to kind of learn and digest the content. But definitely, it could help me work on very nice feedback sessions before the evaluation itself. Then we have two-way communication, which is promoting communication between you and your students, right? I know that we have clear rules to follow. We decide what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, but also to invite them into this process. How? By giving them clear instructions beforehand for them to know what we are expecting from them, for them to know how they're going to be evaluated. Okay. And this applies for everybody at any level. Remember, we talked about principles. This is one of those principles, right? Um, so in this way, we also help our students be more comfortable during the day of the evaluation because I know that we might have students that really don't care about the evaluations, but we also have other students that get really, really, really nervous, right? So it could work both ways, right? To engage in some ways the ones that are a little bit more distracted and to give a chance to the ones that get a little bit more nervous to have some additional practice before the evaluation, right? So um, sometimes we evaluate them and they don't know how they're going to be evaluated. Are they going to have a test? Are they going to have a role play? Are they going to have listening as part of the evaluation? Are they going to have reading or writing? What is it? What is expected? Because my expectations might not match my students' expectations or realities. Okay? So if I just give them very vague instructions, and then when they have the evaluation, I would say, I needed more content. You only spoke for 2 minutes, and I needed at least 5 minutes. But if I don't tell my student that beforehand, how is she or he supposed to know? That would be very unfair for them. Okay. If from the beginning they know that I'm expecting 5 minutes for the reason it is, but I'm expecting 5 minutes, they already know. So they just spoke for 2 minutes is part also of their decision, right? Or it will also tell me that my student is not achieving the objectives that were expected, okay? Not from a punishing perspective, but like a wake up call that, okay, there's something happening here, okay? Then deeper understanding. Assessment for learning leads you and your learners to develop deeper understanding of what is being learned and why. So it's not just, oh, I have to learn the simple present. No, it's useful because I'm not just telling them, but showing them, okay, why it's useful. I know, especially with high school students, they tend not to believe what we tell them, right? So let's not uh, just give them a lot of arguments like you should know this because of this and this and this, but let's show them. Let's say that you meet someone and you have to introduce yourself. Go. I don't know how to do it. I don't know the words. I don't. Okay, that's why I'm teaching you this vocabulary and I'm teaching you these structures. Okay, so when you have to interact, you can do it. Let me give you an example. Okay, and in that way, your students will see by experience how it works. Okay, and then we have greater motivation. Mhm. Motivation for you and also motivation for your students. It works both ways. And basically is to focus on the needs that they have at this specific time or the goals that I have at this specific time. We cannot cover everything in just one evaluation. We have to be realistic. We cannot cover everything in a feedback session. We have to choose those two, three things that are the most important ones. When we are giving feedback to our students and we just sit down and write everything, and if we have a checklist or a rubric to follow, and it can be a lot of work also for ourselves, right? So I'm going to focus on this evaluation. I'm going to focus on the simple present, and that's it. Or I'm just going to focus on this vocabulary. So in that way, it's not overwhelming for me because I will have to be like writing like everything down. And it will also be overwhelming for my students when they get the feedback. Or sometimes they get a rubric that they don't understand. For example, the little ones that they don't even know how to write or read. And we just give them like a piece of paper to paste in their notebooks. I mean, that's just empty for them. They will not understand what to do with that. Okay. So that's when this kind of mediation comes into place, right? Then we have higher attainment also. That is kind of the combination of deeper understanding and greater motivation that can lead to greater exam success. Okay, not because we are evaluating for a particular exam, in the sense that, okay, we have that evaluation and I'm going to get my students ready for it and that's it. That shouldn't be the focus. I'm preparing my students for life, but I know that they have to pass that exam, right? Or I need to see how they are doing in the exam. So if they don't pass the exam, that's not necessarily something bad. It just means that they're not there yet. Okay, so what do I do with that? Uh, and also, this higher attainment goes hand in hand with these important aspect of teaching and evaluation that not all my students are supposed to pass the evaluation. And I think that's something that sometimes we feel pressure with because if we are learning, we're going to have mistakes. So mistakes are welcome. If I don't have any mistakes, honestly, I'm not learning. Okay. Maybe because the content is already too easy for me, right? So It's just covered and I don't have like any extra challenges for it. So learning is not taking place, right? So having 100 all the time, even though it looks very nice, is not a real reflection of learning. Okay, so we also have to be careful with that. And with assessment for learning, we can see right there the thinking process that my students are following, because in an exam is basically my student and the exam, right? Or my student and the questions that I ask him or her, right? If they cannot read or write, for example, but it's just right there. I cannot really see the thinking process itself, but with this part of assessment for learning, I can see right there where they are struggling and I can help them, or I can ask somebody else to help them. Okay, so higher attainment doesn't mean that I'm going to get better grades all the time. No, it doesn't mean that I'm going to have 100 for all my students. No, no, no. But it means that I will be able to see progress in time in some way or another. Okay, so maybe all these assessments for learning that I used before quiz one didn't help directly the performance of my student in quiz one, but it helped the performance in quiz two. Remember that learning is not necessarily linear. Sometimes we're moving, sometimes we need to go back, sometimes we need to go up or down or forward. So it's not linear, right? It has different tendencies, and that's part of it. But with the conviction that whatever I'm doing will help my students at some point of their learning process. Then we have learner autonomy. This is important and especially important from a very young age, okay? We can be there for students. Like in primary school, we need to be there in a different way in how we do it with high school students. But at all levels, we have to be there for our students, okay? So, in this way, when I give them the chance and the responsibility to take a look at their own learning, I'm fostering autonomy. Mhm. I'm not gonna be there with them 24/7. I'm not gonna be their teacher during all their academic life. In the future, they will be learning other things rather than English. Maybe they would like to explore other languages, or maybe in higher education, right? They will be covering different topics. And we are teaching students whose professions are not clear yet. The world is moving at a very fast pace, and maybe the first graders that you have this year will be professionals in careers that don't exist yet. So, so how do I prepare them? You don't prepare them based on the content. That will be impossible for you and for anybody. You don't prepare them for the content. You prepare them for the skills. Okay? So, yeah, the simple present is very nice. Yeah, the vocabulary related to animals is very nice. But that will change, right? In other contexts, at different stages of their life. So, what do you teach them? The skill of being able to sit down and analyze what I feel comfortable with in terms of the topics and what I'm struggling with. If I identify what I'm struggling with, then what do I do with this? Even for first graders, okay, you're having difficulties or you don't understand these flashcards. What can you do with this? Maybe I can draw. Teacher, can I draw this? Sure, go ahead. You don't need to give your students everything. You don't need to solve every single problem they have. You need to be there and guide them and ask questions to help them out. But we also need them to get to their own conclusions and their own solutions too. Okay? So it's not leaving our students alone, it's being there with the right questions that will help them go through these kind of critical thinking process, something that we really need to teach. Critical thinking is not just something that happens because it happens, right? It's something that we need to teach them. And it's not something about languages. We also need to teach them critical thinking in Spanish and, well, obviously also in English. Okay, so fostering these autonomy that in future years, regardless of the content, they will know what to do and how to do it. Mhm. Also, in this part of assessment for learning, how to collaborate with others, how to be um, also kind with others, how to be patient when maybe other people are not understanding the topic. I already understood the topic. What can I do also to help others, right? To be empathetic with the process, to be patient. Maybe I'm not understanding this yet. I always tell my students use the word yet at the end. Profe, I don't understand this. It's very difficult. So I tell them, okay, change that for me. Profe, I'm not understanding this, or I don't understand this yet. Okay, not yet. So what can we do? That last word helps a lot. And I have used this with primary students, and it really works, right? And it's very nice because they even start using phrases that go hand in hand with learner autonomy. Like, okay, I don't understand this yet. What can I do? Okay, I have one solution. So I always ask my students, okay, you have that problem. Give me one solution. If I have a better solution, I will give it to you. If yours work, let's go that way. Okay, so that's also important in terms of guiding them in the process, and also for our own professional development, because we can learn a lot from our students in this process. Maybe changes that they are doing by themselves that I can also use with other students. These assessment for learning gives me the time to see them work right there inside the classroom, to see how they prepare for exams, for them to experiment with the activities that I'm giving them, to reflect on the process and possible ways to support them. Okay, so it's kind of a mini lab where I can see how everything is going without having to devote extra time on this. So, to summarize this part, why assessment for learning? It can definitely help us make better decisions, not faster decisions necessarily, not easier ones, but definitely more informed and purposeful ones. So, maybe I'm going at a very fast um, rhythm in my classes, and I need to slow down, and I will need to compromise some topics, maybe, but I have to make sure that A, B, and C are really covered because that will determine if they have the basis for the next level, for example. So they might not be easy, they might not be fast, but definitely they will be better. Also, assessment for learning shifts in terms of changing kind of a little bit the role that we have, right? Because we tend to be like right there next to the student, telling him or her what to do and how to fix it and move this here, and you need to focus on this, and you have to follow A, B, C, and D. Like we give them everything. And what about if we are there to guide them to get to that process, right? So we become more a guide of learning. And this, as I mentioned before, is something that we need to cultivate from a very young age, right? Um, if you're already working with high school students, you can start fostering this, right? You will definitely see a change. And if you're working with first graders, second graders, third graders, even you should even give more emphasis to this, okay? Because it will become part of their learning habits. And then you transform students and also grades from something passive into something active. Okay, understanding the process, and this can even help your students maybe when they don't get a very good grade, and I quote unquote because sometimes a good grade for me might be different for you. And sometimes, sadly, even though we can have great evaluations, they don't capture the progress and the process of learning. Mhm. Sometimes our students can get, I don't know, a 50. And if you have not been involved in the process of that student, you might say, a 50, a terrible grade, how come? But this is terrible, and so on and so forth. But if you have been there with your student, if you have had time to see this person work inside the classroom, if you have had these opportunities of assessment for learning, and you know that this student is really struggling with the topics, but you have seen improvement in terms of my student already understands the instructions, already understands what to do. My student is uh, working on his emotions or her emotions better, doesn't get frustrated so easily at the first time that he or she encounters a problem. That's improvement, that's progress that sadly sometimes we cannot see in a grade. And eventually, the academic part will join this. Okay. So, when our students are able to see in these sessions that they are improving, when they see the 50, maybe they're not going to be happy. But we have to reinforce this idea that, okay, we still have work to do, but you already did A, B, and C, and I'm very proud of you. Okay, so in that sense, evaluation is not seen as something catastrophic, right? But it is seen as space for learning. So after this one, we have this idea that um, it becomes a tool, right? Where all of our students can be included regardless of the level they are at, and to understand better what they need rather than just label them with a 50 or a 60 or an 80 or a 100. Because it is very risky to always believe that a student who got a 50 is not learning, and to always believe that a student who got a 100 is learning. Not necessarily. Okay. And as I mentioned before, it will support learning skills that students will continue to use in other subjects and also in other contexts. Okay. Um, so it's not just about the topic itself, but how to organize information, how to summarize information, how to explain a topic to others, how to analyze advantages, how to analyze disadvantages, how to design steps, how to work on different motor skills, you name it. So these principles apply across educational levels. What changes between primary and secondary education is not the purpose of the assessment, but the level of complexity, remember, of the tasks that we use, the language that we use, the type of questions that we ask them. It's not the same type of question that I can ask a third grader than I will ask my student who is in seventh grade, for example. I can use different vocabulary, I can use different structures, everything adapted to their level. So, for the reflection, which of these benefits do you already see in your classroom, and which one would you like to strengthen through your assessment practices? Okay, so if you say, I feel that my students are really motivated in my classes, and I see that they are not struggling that much with evaluation, but I feel that they depend a lot on me. I would like to work on their autonomy. So you can use these teaching for learning to focus on learner autonomy. So, yes, you will have a practice, you will have an interaction, but you will develop an activity in which they have to support each other and don't depend on you so much. Something as simple as, I'm sure this has happened to you, especially with primary school, that you give an instruction, you sit down, your students start working, and a minute after, you have all your students around your desk asking questions about what they have to do, even though you just explained that to them. So what you do is, okay, that's not learner autonomy. So what we do is, okay, you're gonna work in groups. In each group, there will be a person that will be in charge of helping you with the instructions in case you didn't understand them. Okay. So what you do is you make sure that those people really understood the instructions, and if somebody else has a question, they will go to that person, not to you. Okay, that's helping each other, cooperating, and also you're giving them specific roles that they have to pay attention to because they have a responsibility. So it's easier for you. You can sit down a little bit and you can see them work. You can see them interact. Because when we are just checking things and explaining things and moving around, we don't have a couple of minutes to just sit down and see them work. Okay, that's extremely valuable because I can see how they interact, how they react, okay? And that can help me also with further decisions, right? So, yeah, definitely which ones you feel comfortable with, which ones do you think will be of great help? Or maybe the other way around. I think that they can work on their own, but maybe they are not motivated enough. So maybe in this assessment for learning, I will focus on motivation. Okay. At the end, everything is preparation for the exam. Okay. And how often do your assessment practices help you and your students understand learning rather than simply measuring it? It could be that now you're asking yourself this question like, oh no, okay, I never do this. I just give them the grade and then I continue with the next content and the next topic. Okay, that's good to know. What are we going to do about it? Maybe you say, being realistic, I cannot incorporate this every single class, but I can incorporate one activity related to assessment for learning once a week. Okay, that's great. Then you will feel more comfortable with this. You will see that it's kind of embedded in what you already do. It's just modifying a little bit one instruction, and then you will feel so comfortable with this that maybe you will include it in every single class. Okay, but give it a try. Give it a try. Now let's move to the other big part of this session. What are the challenges? Okay, because as I mentioned at the beginning, I know that some ideas might look very nice. Some of them, at first hand, you say, I will definitely include this in my teaching activities. And then you might find others that you say, oh no, how do I incorporate this? It will be like a lot, okay? Not only with this topic that we're covering today, but with other topics that you might encounter through your professional development. So we also have to be realistic and need not, I mean, we cannot have like these position of everything is perfect, everything works, and no, we have to be realistic because in that way is what I consider the way in which we can identify our own strengths, our own weaknesses, and see what is possible inside my context. So I also have some challenges here. Maybe you will quickly identify some of these. Maybe some of them you would say, this is interesting because I also have these challenges when I want to do A, B, or C. So some of these are not just for assessment for learning. They could be for many other practices that you already have in your classes. So the first one will be the assessment criteria. Okay. Um, Sometimes exams are not presented in a way that kind of are very welcoming to our students. Maybe they have like these very long instructions, or maybe very specific terms that they don't understand. So the assessment criteria also plays kind of a big challenge here, um, because they might encounter the challenges not because of the content, but how it is presented to them. Okay, so maybe during the assessment for learning sessions that we had, they did a great job, and then they get to the evaluation and you say like, what happened here? It's not the same student that I had yesterday than the one that I have today. Maybe it has to do with the evaluation itself. Maybe we could have different factors. This is just like one of them. And these can definitely lead students to feel that they are like maybe not prepared or feel frustrated. So we have to make sure that the assessment criteria matches, right, the reality that we have in the class, right? Taking that into account, and how do I take my reality to the next level that I need? I'm going step by step. Okay. Um, in this case, also in terms of assessment criteria, giving examples uh, works a lot. Okay, this is what we need to do. Let me give you an example. Pam, 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 pam. Ah, okay. In that way, I also avoid unexpected answers in the exam, or for some students to do completely the opposite of what I was expecting. So remember, my expectations have to be clear to my students. Even though they are super clear in my head, they have to be clear for my students too. And also kind of understanding what success looks like, right? And kind of um, avoiding these misconception that 100 equals learning. That's not precisely the case, okay? Then we have accurate assessment, okay, which are basically the principles of evaluation that we have to follow, right? It could be in terms of exams, it could be in terms of presentations, um, you name it, right? There are principles to follow in order to make sure that the evaluation is valid, that it is measuring what it is supposed to measure, and that the results also kind of tell us something about their performance, right? So sometimes we need to learn a lot of this by ourselves and through the years, right? And if you identify that maybe developing evaluations is one of the areas that you struggle the most, so identify it and work on it. There's nothing wrong with not knowing. Is what do you do after you identify that? Um, and then we have physical and digital environments. Um, Sometimes another teacher will kind of apply the exam that we designed, maybe. Sometimes the physical space is not the best one, and that's something that we cannot change, right? Or um, even during some evaluations, um, there could be environmental factors like maybe a lot of noise or people passing by that can work as distractors. So even though we work with the assessment for learning, these are situations that sometimes we cannot control. And we also have to understand that. And maybe this evaluation was not the best one in terms of how the environment was, in terms if it's like a physical environment or digital environment, in case you use some sort of platform, for example. But that's why we have more than one evaluation, because this is expected to happen at some point too. Um, Then we can move to the other one of lack of class time. As I mentioned before, it can be a reality that we have to cover a lot of content and maybe we don't have enough time, or maybe it's a group that requires more attention than other groups. So it's part of it. So, how do we deal with that? I would say we prioritize uh, those contents and those exercises, those activities that will really be meaningful for them. Okay, so maybe I have A, B, C, and D to cover. I will cover A, B, and C, but I know that B and D, I really need to invest a lot of time on those two because I have previously identified that they struggle a lot with it. Okay, so maybe I wanted to have four activities for each one of them, but it's not realistic. I'm going to have two. But those two activities would be amazing. Again, I simplify not with the purpose of just eliminating things randomly. No, 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 no. You cover what you have to cover, but how you practice and how you address that content is what changes. So you make sure that you cover the topics. If in the syllabus you have to cover A, B, C, and D, well, we cover A, B, C, and D. But you kind of balance things. You know that with A, my students are doing an amazing job. So one activity, two activities, that's it. But with B, I have seen in these sessions of assessment for learning that they're having difficulties. So I will definitely need three activities for this. Okay, that's the balance that we find. Then planning the activities. As I mentioned before, it's not that you have to create and lots of different activities, but you have to plan what you're going to do with a clear intention and a clear objective. If you are just forcing yourself to use a particular handout in another way just because of the sake of it, don't do it. Don't force yourself. What you do in your classes, what you include in your lesson plans, is because it's going to be useful in some way. It's going to have a purpose. If not, why? Right? Um, so when we are planning, the reflection process needs to be part of it because we can take previous experiences and adapt what we are doing for future weeks and future exercises. Over time, as we become more confident with assessment for learning practices, we will also develop the strategies to make planning more efficient. Mhm. Learner expectations. At first hand, our students will only expect the grade or the handout or the sticker or the happy face. That's what they're going to be expecting, but that will become less important in these practice. Okay. The important part is what we do in class when we are together right there, how I guide them. And the evaluation will be just an extra step to follow, no, the main step, okay, or the final step to follow. So it's important to have conversations with our students in terms of I know that grades are important, I know that numbers tell us something, but what we do before that evaluation is the most important part for me. How you commit with it, how you engage, how you develop this sense of responsibility and ownership for your own learning, how you help others, how you take the content and are you able to explain it to somebody else? Are you able to simplify it in some way? And so on and so forth. So, gradually, and by highlighting also the benefits that your students will receive, they will be more open. Is it's not necessary to go over very fancy words or technicalities. Just let's go simple. You will benefit from this in A, B, and C, and that's it. Okay. Um, then the part of feedback, as I was mentioning before. Um, Students are less likely to pay attention to feedback when it's just next to a grade because they will focus on the number. Ah, yeah, I passed the exam, or oh, I didn't. And that's it. And we cannot ask them to have the responsibility or that sense of commitment when they are in primary school or sometimes even in high school to sit down and analyze what they did wrong and how to fix that under the context that mistakes are not bad. Mhm. What is what can be a problem in the future is if you don't sit down and analyze what you are doing. Okay, the mistakes are part of it. And in this way, you can ask yourself like a couple of questions like, was my feedback specific and clear? For example, with first graders, second graders, was I clear so they could understand the feedback, or was it more for adults? Mhm. Or for high school students, sometimes we tend to provide very maybe like complicated or explain things sometimes in a very complicated manner. And let's simplify it. Let's simplify it. It will be easier for us. They will connect better with the topic. Mhm. Also, was my feedback on time? Did they have the feedback before they had the next evaluation or not? Was my feedback linked to the learning intentions that I had for them? If the focus of the evaluation is for my students to be able to talk about routines, and then I use the simple present for them to describe a person, definitely the feedback will not align, not even the evaluation, with the intention of it. Mhm. Was my feedback focused on the task and not the learner? What I was mentioning before, that some students go at a very specific pace and they have like their own progress. So I'm just focusing on what is generally expected or what I know that I'm expecting from this student. Was my feedback appropriate for the level of my student? Going again a little bit back to handouts. I know I need that support in the notebook also for parents to have that. Um, but the most important part is for my student to understand, right? And if he or she can't read or write yet, so I'm not getting to my audience. I need, in this case, for example, a group session. I could invest, it could be 10, 15 minutes. I'm not talking about investing a whole day of classes. It could be 10, 15 minutes to go over a particular topic, okay? And in that way, because I know that it's impossible to go student by student, it's not realistic. So you work it out as a group. And in that way, you make sure that your students had another opportunity to learn and to check what they did. And um, and also, and something that we sometimes don't consider is that is my feedback calling my students to take action? Or it's just like, oh yeah, these are the mistakes and well, that's it. Or is it calling for action? Okay, you're struggling with this. What can you do? How are we going to fix this for our next evaluation? What suggestions do you have? How may I help you with this? Remember, asking the right questions. And finally, we have cooperation because based on these experiences, sometimes we will need the cooperation of other people in the learning process. Maybe other teachers, maybe parents, maybe the school, maybe the education system, right? Because we will need some sort of flexibility too. So that sometimes might be of great help and sometimes it can be a challenge. So we have also to be realistic in terms of what I do, what I can do with what I have and the context where I work. Okay, so that could help you also a lot because instead of closing opportunities, it opens opportunities that are realistic and viable for you and for your group. Okay. Because sometimes, for example, parents will focus also on the grade. Like, I know, but my kid got a 50. That's a terrible grade. So we also can face a challenge there, but it's important for us to open spaces of discussion when possible. Like, yeah, I know that a 50 is, it doesn't look nice. And definitely it shows that we need to keep working on A, B, C, and D. But I also want to share with you that I have seen improvement also in A, B, C, and D that is not precisely in a multiple choice exercise. Okay, so that's the part of cooperation that could be a challenge sometimes, right? Also, how we give that feedback, how we incorporate that feedback, and so on and so forth. So these are just a couple of challenges to mention, and I think that you could identify maybe a couple of them. um, so these are not a sign of poor teaching. So don't think like, oh, yes, I have experienced this with other teaching practices. Ooh, what am I doing wrong? No, this is exactly the natural part of working with assessment in real classrooms. Not everything is perfect, so don't feel discouraged if you identify some of them. They are challenges. They are not bad. They are just challenges. With some of them, we can completely overcome those challenges. Some of them, depending on my own context and my background, maybe I cannot overcome them 100%, and maybe 50%. And maybe some of them are going to be there for eternity. So I just go around and look for a different way. Mhm. Then I know that we feel pressure to cover content. Definitely. We have a syllabus to follow and materials to complete. Definitely. But as I was mentioning, choose the content that is worth investing more time than required, or more time than what you usually invest in it. Mhm. Sometimes the biggest challenge is not the time or resources, but our own beliefs about assessment, because we were taught that evaluation is for a grade and to see if the student passes or not, which is a little part of it, but not all of it. Mhm. So I'm sure that maybe when we see this, we might think, oh, it's something else that I have to do, or how I'm going to include this in my class, or my students, I know that their critical thinking skills are awful, and I struggle with these A, B, C, and D. Those might be our beliefs, those might be our own experiences too that we bring to the table. Um, but let's take some time when you have like these thoughts. Let's take some time to see which ones are a reality and which ones are more related to our own beliefs, and our belief system. And as I was mentioning, this is not about adding something extra, is with what you have, how do I take that to the next level in terms of cooperation, in terms of interaction, in terms of identifying what I'm struggling with and what do I do with this? Okay, so sometimes assessment for learning is just asking a question, and then you open the possibility. You spend 2, 3 minutes on that and you keep moving and you kind of work on this principle. Also, it helps create safer learning environments where mistakes are seen as part of the process. And that's something that we can teach from a very young age. It's not just the 100, it's not just the 50, it's the process that went uh, through it. Okay. And I always tell my students, you need to make mistakes when you are learning. That's the only way in which you learn, and to be exposed to your mistakes. But mistakes become a problem when you don't do anything about them. It's not just saying, yes, mistakes are great, I'm learning. Okay, you already identify them, you have to correct them, and you have to keep track of them. Okay? Because otherwise, they will be with you forever and ever. When students move between grades and sometimes teachers too, they may encounter very different assessment practices, right? That can be confusing sometimes. while the student gets used to the teacher and the teacher gets used to the student. It gets both ways. But when we have been working with this assessment of learning, we will make that process so much easier for the other teacher and for my students. So think about this, as I mentioned before, building a community among ourselves. So if I teach my students and train my students into this assessment for learning, when they get to the next level with another teacher, they will not struggle that much because the evaluation will be like in second place, and the process and the steps of preparation will be the most important one. Okay, so in this way we also help each other. And another challenge is sustainability. Sometimes we may try these strategies but abandon them because they feel overwhelming or they're completely disconnected from our daily practice because we see them as something additional and they are already part of the process of what we do. I'm sure that when you have a handout, you correct the handout with your students and you ask your students, do you have any questions? And they will tell you 99% of the time, no. And then when you get to the evaluation, you see that they didn't understand the topic and that they didn't ask. So instead of asking the traditional question of, do you have any questions? Ask questions directly to some students, okay? Or plan a little follow-up activity in which you can make sure that they understood. That is assessment for learning. Okay? It's not something extra. You're already doing it by asking the question, do you understand? But it might be very vague for our students, or they just automatically say, yes, everything is clear, no questions. And then the reality is very different. So sometimes just asking a couple of questions, you can kind of see what is happening. Or something that is even assessment for learning. At the end of some of your classes, ask your students, what did you learn today? It could be about a new word, it could be something new about helping someone else, about a structure. Um, what did you learn today? That's also assessment for learning because you're questioning and giving them time to reflect and to think. Okay. So for this reflection time from this side, we have which of these challenges resonate most with you, with your own teaching context, right? Which ones you say, yeah, this is me. This is me. This has happened to me before. This is something that I want to improve, maybe. This is something that I have an idea in terms of how to work on. Okay. And which challenge would you like to address first through small changes in your assessment practices? And take a look at these here. Small changes. Remember, we don't progress, like we don't improve with big changes every single time. I always tell my students, look for progress, not perfection. The same thing applies to us. We cannot change everything because maybe what we are doing is already working, so why changing it? But you can adjust some aspects of it to incorporate, for example, the topic of today, assessment for learning, where you could maybe see the benefits with your students with just adding a couple of extra questions, different classroom arrangement, for example, that can help too. And now we move to the last part of the session, which is how can these be implemented? Mhm. How can these be implemented in your classes? So, assessment for learning, and I have been focusing mostly in the before part, right? Because regularly is where we have more time and we have more flexibility, but we can also work on this during the evaluation and after the evaluation. So, as I have been mentioning before, you can personalize this and you can choose. Maybe for this particular evaluation, my assessment for learning will work before or during or maybe after, or maybe I can use the three of them. Okay, so it's basically you choose what works for you. So what we see here is not a sequence of kind of isolated strategies, but it's a learning cycle. We know that when we learn, we need lots of encounters with content and lots of repetition too. So that's why it's a learning cycle. We cannot ask our students to be critical thinkers if we don't teach them how to do that and we don't give them opportunities to learn. We cannot ask our students to share their daily routine if I don't give them different opportunities to practice. So that's why this works as a cycle, where sometimes some evaluations can even overlap each other. Because remember that learning is not, I learned this for this specific purpose and that was it. This content will help you and will work with you through different stages of the process. And always keeping in mind that we never stop learning. We never stop learning. And this idea of the cycle is very useful to also kind of transmit this to our students because they have like this idea that there comes a kind of point in their lives where they will be like, okay, I already learned everything I needed to learn. It's impossible to learn everything, especially with languages. You keep learning every single day. And that's why the idea of cycle can be very useful because they learn from a very young age that this is an ongoing process, that you will come to a point in which you feel comfortable with what you are doing and communicating and expressing yourselves, but we never stop learning. Um, so, one of the most um, useful maybe parts would be the before the task that I was mentioning because it depends on the rules that we have to follow and the specific school system that sometimes during the evaluation might be a little bit more complicated, right? Sometimes after the evaluation, I have to kind of catch up with content and start getting ready for the next evaluation that is coming. So maybe I don't have a lot of time after the evaluation to do this. So that's why most people recommend if time is very limited, choose the before the task part, okay? But don't miss the opportunity of trying it out at some point, either before, during, and after the evaluation, okay? Because as I was mentioning at some point during this session, for example, group feedback, how are you going to give that feedback that you want it to be precisely about that evaluation, the performance that they had just after it? There's no other way, right? So try to mix. I think that there's no just one correct answer or just one correct way, but mixing and balancing strategies has proven to be very helpful. In primary, for example, primary school, this may mean modeling or working together first, being an example for your students because at these ages, like if you give like lots and lots and lots of instruction, they will get lost, right? Also, their attention spans are kind of shorter, and you already know how it works. So instead of just giving and giving and giving instructions, just go ahead and model what you're expecting from them. Children learn from seeing, not so much from what you tell them. Okay, so also the assessment for learning should go on that line. With um, with other students, maybe what it may involve is clarifying strategies, for example, or taking a look at the criteria that will be used before they start with the independent work. With, for example, high school students, Show them the rubric that you will use. Show them the checklist. They need to understand what you're expecting from them. And even the rubric can work as a checklist for them to see if they are ready or not. That could also be a question in terms of assessment for learning. After this practice, I don't know, they have a role play for the exam. So you give them time to get ready for the role play, they help each other, you review some topics, they kind of identify the ones that they feel comfortable with, the ones that they are struggling with the most. Perfect. And then you can give them the rubric and tell them, if you had to evaluate yourself today, where would you place yourself in the rubric? You can even incorporate a little bit of self-assessment and peer assessment. I know that with some groups, this can be a challenge, especially if you have some issues, maybe in terms of how they behave, for example. But you know your groups, you know when it's possible, and you know that with some groups it's going to be like super easy. Some groups, I'm not saying that it's going to be impossible, but it will take more time to train them into how to work on self assessment and peer assessment. But with that, in a very nice scenario, they will be able to say, okay, you know, teacher, for this topic, I feel comfortable with this description, but with this other one, no, I need to practice this a little bit more. So that would be guiding them in terms of the independent work, right? Even in high school, we also need to model. What am I expecting? If I'm expecting a role play, what about the role play? Right? Okay, you're gonna have dialogues, and I want you to also take into account intonation and rhythm and how you organize the ideas, how you connect them. To include a specific vocabulary or to include a specific structures. I want the role play to be funny or to be sarcastic or to be happy or to be sad, or that's up to you to decide. All those things have to be taken into consideration. Um, a good performance starts with good instructions. And what we notice during the task often tells us more than the final answer. Okay? Um, how they interact, how they behave, how they solve things, how they identify issues. That's where we have kind of the value of these strategy, let's say. And I highlighted the word notice because we have to be there, paying attention, looking at them, trying not to intervene as much as possible unless we see that they're kind of losing track of the objective. So we ask some questions and we get back to it. Um, so, for example, before the practice that you can have with them, before you incorporate the assessment for learning, you can discuss with them the learning intentions. It works from first graders up to high school students. Like, you have to modify the level of your vocabulary, maybe. Maybe go a little bit straight to the point. Use maybe more visuals, the board, have some pictures, some keywords. It depends. You know your levels, you know your students, but discuss the learning intentions with them based on the needs that you have identified. Remember that our students can have needs, lacks, and wants. Not necessarily they align among each other. But as the professionals inside the classroom, as the professionals in charge of the learning process, we are the ones that determine their needs at that particular time. Okay? And also the lacks. Sometimes their needs will match their wants. Sometimes they don't. And that's part of learning and teaching too. But yeah, for them to be able to have this space in which you share with them, these are the needs that you have. This is what I need us to work together, um, to share with them what they can achieve already in the process. For example, with the little ones, motivate them. How many animals do you think you can identify? Like tell me or show me with your fingers. 2, 3, 5. Well, you know what? I think that you can already identify 5 of them. Let's practice. Okay, so you kind of get the attention of your audience. Um, Also, with high school students, we can also tell them and be kind of straightforward in terms of the additional support that you can provide. Like, okay, for this specific activity that we're going to be working on self-assessment, it's like the first time, or we're getting ready and I'm training you into self-assessment. So I'm going to be there with you. Then, after 3 times that you have done this, well, maybe your support might be a little bit more limited and more reserved because you need to give them the chance. Okay. Um, and yeah, that before explain everything as clear as possible. Then during the exam practice, they can ask you questions, definitely. You could have one person that could represent the group and go and ask you questions. You can open the space for each student to come and ask you questions. You can be moving around. Remember, you have to notice things. You have to be the observer in this process. And also to ask the right questions when needed. And sometimes you need to give real time feedback right there. Sometimes you can go with a piece of paper and take some notes and you walk around and then you give group feedback. But sometimes you need to correct right there. Um, and kind of you can also measure and kind of observe um, the relationship between the learning intentions that you have and also how you plan the activity and how you deliver the feedback and the result. So everything is kind of connected in one way or another. Mhm. And after these practice activity, you don't need to create like anything else. You could just have a couple of questions that could be general, like, what did you do well? What do you think you need to work on? If you need to give me a number from 1 to 3, 3 being that you feel really comfortable with a topic and you know how to use it, how would you rank yourself? 1, 2, or 3? Mhm. Or having like some phases like, how do you feel with this? For also for those students that struggle a lot or a little bit more in terms of how to share their emotions. Use some examples from the class. Maybe you don't need to call each other's names, just like, okay, I have this example. I saw that one group was working on this and it was really nice because A, B, and C. Also, this other group did an amazing job in A, B, and C. Okay. As a group, generally speaking, I have seen that we need to work on A and B. Could you tell me 2 other things that we need to work on? So you see, so we meet halfway. I'm not giving everything right there. I also kind of make them think. Um, Remember after these spaces to have a clear idea of what you were expecting from them. You could even have like a little checklist for you, 2, 3 things that you know that those were kind of the objectives or of the space, how you're going to provide feedback. And also, these will represent and be of great value for your students because they will not longer connect evaluation just with a grade. They will connect evaluation with working together, the teacher asking me questions to help me out, not understanding and then understanding. So it's not just the grade. And let me move to this other slide. After, um, remember that the task, like at the end, what you ask your students to complete, will be even more visible, will be even more explicit because they already went through this process. So it's not just, ah, that's the result and that's it. But what they did will answer to a specific learning process. And this structure of before, during, after, that you can choose one or incorporate the 3 of them will allow you to adapt and adjust the support Remember, we have to be flexible. Learning is not linear. So our teaching practices and our learning practices, they cannot be linear. They have to match in that sense. So as I was mentioning, if you rather use one, you use one, and then if you want to give it a try to another one in a specific evaluation, give it a try. It does not require new tests, new materials, new rubrics. Is with whatever you're using, just take it to another level. Sometimes just with a question, and that's it. It requires a different use of what we already have. Instead of just a handout to see which ones are correct and incorrect, I use that same handout. I take it to another level. In groups, you're gonna identify the topics that you are struggling the most as a group and the ones that you really feel comfortable with. And then you're going to help another group that is really struggling with the ones that you are doing a great job. That's it. You took the same handout and you just elevate it. And even one small change in one stage of the cycle can make assessment more meaningful. Have you seen how I have used this phrase a lot? Small changes throughout the presentation. Remember, it's not something big and drastic that you need to incorporate. Sometimes just a follow-up question. Sometimes just asking your students to draw a smiley face and a sad face next to some of the topics in the practice, for example, and then what to do to turn that sad face into a smiley face, Joe. So small changes. Remember, look for progress, not perfection. And as part of the reflection for this section, which part of this cycle do you feel currently use the least and why? You could say, okay, I never kind of show them how I'm going to evaluate them before the evaluation. I just give them the rubric or the checklist after they were evaluated. So that's something that you can include in the before part. You see, just showing them and explaining to them what is expected from their performance is assessment for learning in the before stage. During, I really like to use handouts, and my students really like to use handouts, but I will ask some follow-up questions after we check them. Or after, I never give them group feedback, and that's something that I think will help a lot. I could take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes out of my class to do that. What is one small change? Again, small change you could make in one stage of this cycle in your next lesson. So let's move this from the abstract into possible actions. Okay, so when you start teaching this academic school year, when you're planning your classes, and you know that evaluations might be around the corner, maybe in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, you start working on this not one day before because there's no room for improvement or action or change. You start working with this at least 2 weeks before, okay? If you just want to use it exclusively before evaluations, you can use this throughout the school year. That would be the best scenario, okay? But what is one small change that you could make in your plan to incorporate either the before, during, or after? So, final thoughts around this. These are, and I wanted like the summary of what we have talked about today to be in the format of questions because I told you a lot during this session, like ask the right questions to guide your students, right? So this is precisely what I want us all together to do, like ask ourselves these questions because I don't have the answers for them. Why? Because it will depend on your own teaching context. So let's take a look at them. How well do your learners understand the assessment criteria of the exam they are preparing for? The before part. Do you take some time to kind of make sure that your expectations are clear for them too, or are they just in your head? What misconceptions do your learners have about the exam they are preparing for? Here I use the word exam. It could be oral presentation, a quiz, a listening exam, production, role play, you name it. What misconceptions do they have? Maybe you have some ideas, but you can also ask them directly. Like, what do you think? Or how do you feel about this exam? Mhm. Also, be careful with the type of question you get because maybe you will get answers that might not be useful, answers that sometimes can cause some sort of controversy, especially with high school students. So be careful with the question you ask. Like, what are your expectations from this evaluation? How do you feel about it? Oh, I'm really nervous because I always get like lots and lots of mistakes that I have to fix and I don't know how to fix them. Okay, I completely understand that. So for this evaluation, we're also going to focus on the mistakes that go hand in hand with what we have been studying. So you don't feel overwhelmed. And in that way, we can kind of make sure that you will correct them for the next evaluation. So there always has to be uh, some sort of commitment from the students too. Okay. What expectations do your learners have about the amount of exam practice they should do and what kind of feedback they should get? Are they expecting lots and lots and lots and lots of practice? Are parents expecting lots and lots of practice? Because sometimes we think that quantity is a synonym of quality, and not necessarily. I could give my student 15 handouts, and maybe they will not be ready for the evaluation. I can give my students two great handouts, and I can never be 100% sure, but I have more possibilities of seeing my students I kind of thrive in the evaluation, right? Again, not because I just want hundreds, no, that they thrive at the level that they have. Maybe for one of my students getting a 50 is like the maximum he or she can do yet. Remember that yet? At this particular time. Later, maybe for next evaluation, we can get a higher grade, right? If I want to focus on the grade that much. Because remember that progress sometimes cannot be measured with numbers. So what are their expectations to make sure that I also explain to them, okay, we're going to work on these two activities to get ready for the exam. Not every single activity needs a handout. Sometimes I could have more impromptu activities. I could have games. I can even use gamification, which that will be another topic for a session, but we can also use gamification in the classroom and incorporate games into what our students are doing. It's a great way. They have a lot of fun. And it's not just having a game because I want to have a game. It has to kind of answer a particular objective that I have in mind. But yes, why not? And through a game, I can also open a space for these assessment for learning. What kind of feedback? Feedback in terms of grades should be written down all the time as backup for you as teacher and as backup for the students. But what do I do? What else do I do with that feedback? Just that's it. Bye bye. Do I take time as a group to evaluate some of the mistakes? What physical or digital barriers are there to observing your learners during exam practice activities? Um, do you have to be doing something else when they're completing that assessment for learning session? Can you be there with your students? So analyze the context that you have because the idea is that you can be there because you're not only telling them, okay, this is right, this is wrong, this is correct, this is incorrect, etc., but you are modeling and training them, regardless of the age, regardless of the level. You are training them into this mindset. Remember, it's not just an exercise that you do, it's not just the question that you ask. It's a complete mindset in terms of how you perceive learning, how you take ownership of your own learning, and how you view mistakes. Okay. And also, how effective is the feedback that you give? It's just overwhelming for them, overwhelming for you, just focusing on all the mistakes and really don't seeing any improvement. So I'm going to focus on A, B, and that's it. It's impossible for us to focus on everything when we give feedback. Let's focus on one, two, three things the most. And in that way, I make sure that my students will have more time and also more understanding of what they're doing with the objective of improving. Okay, so these are kind of a couple of questions that I had for you. I'm sharing here also some recommended resources online. You can find also a lot of information about assessment for learning. This is not something new. This is something that has been around for a while, just that, as you know, teaching is also changing in some ways. It's also adapting things for the future. It's also going back to old practices that were left out and we have seen that really worked and are really necessary to bring back. So again, it's nothing new, but maybe the approach and the intention that you can give this can really help you to prepare your students for future challenges. So the first one will be a position paper from Oxford University Press on assessment for learning, a very complete one. Then you have this other for research-based principles of assessment for learning, because it's not something vague or abstract. We have research behind this, and numbers to the support what these mindset indicates, and the benefits, which I think is the most important part, the benefits that as teachers we can receive with this, and also our students. And then assessment for learning in an international language proficiency exam, also very important because sometimes our students in the future will have to complete some specific standardized tests or certification exams, for example. So it also goes hand in hand in terms of the importance of how, not that much what they learn, but how they learn when they have to face these type of evaluations. So with this, I come to the end of this session. I hope that it was useful for you for your own everyday activities inside the classroom. Remember that this mindset is not asking you to do something else, to add something out of what you already do, but to make sure that you really take advantage of the energy that you are already investing in your planning, in your materials, in your evaluations, and in your grading. Um, Take this as a way to explore different options, always thinking about what's best for your students, what aligns with your own principles as a teacher, with your own experience, but always, always be open to the what if. Okay, like, oh, I want to give it a try. What if it really helps me out? What if it really helps my students to thrive in their evaluations? What if I really feel comfortable with this? What if I already do this? I just need to organize this a little bit more. Okay, and always, always look for ways in which you can share what you are learning, because remember the phrase that I used at the beginning of this presentation, sharing is caring. So my best wishes for the academic school year, and I hope you have learned a lot and that you feel kind of curious in terms of how you can incorporate this into your practices. Thank you so much to the people in charge of organizing these type of spaces that as teachers we really appreciate. And also thank you so much for investing time out of your day to be here, to learn, and to be part of the change that we need in terms of our daily practices in education. So thank you so much for your attention. And with this, I come to the end of the presentation.
Many thanks to Andrea for these valuable ideas and insights shared through this session. Before we conclude, we would like to sincerely thank all our teachers from the Ministry of Public Education who joined us for this webinar. We would also like to kindly remind you of the importance of completing the attendance register, whose link is available in the chat. This registration is an essential requirement for the IDPUGS Ladislao Gámez Solano to be able to issue the digital certificate of participation for each professional development activity carried out during these continuing education webinars. For this reason, we kindly ask each participant teacher to complete both the attendance register and the corresponding evaluation. Please remember that this webinar will be available in the IDP YouTube channel. We also like to encourage you to visit the continuing education website for additional information and resources. This brings our activity to a close. Once again, thank you very much for your participation. We wish you a wonderful rest of the day.